Okay, let's start. Dear colleagues, good morning. Since the program of the forum is very busy and we are going to listen to a lecture by the chairman of the Constitutional Court, and many people would like to attend, and we have time from 10 to 12, there are quite a lot of issues for discussions that we have included into our agenda. Therefore, we will try to deal with all of them. The weather is quite bad. Not all of the speakers have made it to the meeting. Therefore, I'm especially grateful to all of the speakers who are here, who are attending our round table, which is part of the St. Petersburg Legal Forum. Mainly it is devoted to civil law, and those topics and innovations that are related to the civil law are of most interest to our participants. But still, I think that those people who have gathered here are interested and are professionally working in this other area of the law, and we will have lots of questions, I think, which will be in between social legislation and civil law. I will introduce those speakers who have made it to St. Petersburg. Konstantin Ugrumov, who will be opening our panel today, chairman of the National Association of Non-State Pension Funds, the main person in this community. Vladimir Chistyukhin, deputy head of the Central Bank of the Russian Federation, who is in charge, inter alia, non-governmental, non-state pension funds, and including funded contribution-based. Deputy on my left is deputy head of the pension fund of the Russian Federation, Alexander Yegorov, a very important and major expert. He works in the Department for Regulation of the International Labour Organization, ILO. He is doing a lot to make sure that the Russian Federation ratifies the Convention number 102 and other ILO conventions. Next to Mr. Yegorov, our friend, Mr. Cancellation, General Secretary of the International Organization for Social and he is the laureate of the Femida International Prize. Madam Machulska is not only a professor from Moscow State University, and she also represents the Russian Federation. Well, she's a Russian scientist who was elected to two very important committees. One is the Committee of the Council of Europe, which is in charge of country reports on the implementation of the Charter, and she is also a member of the similar committee in ILO. We're only on the way to the ratification of many conventions in the labor field, in the social field, but we should understand that this is a very important business, and ratification means that you have to submit country reports from time to time, and she is also a member of the ILO committee. We have a very representative panel of speakers, and the speakers will define the quality of our discussion. Hope that this discussion today will be very interesting. Judging by yesterday's experience, when people tried to deal on a wide spectrum of issues, I thought that probably in 2 hours it is not possible. Since we have three high-level speakers who know a lot about the funded pension system and the related legislation, and we will work at the Russian pension system, and we wanted to discuss what kind of system it needs through the prism of the balance between governmental and non-governmental pension funds. Well, the chairman of the government took part in this discussion, and the president also was abreast of all the events. And despite the fact that the solution, the basic solution, was carried out, and the moratorium on the freezing of payment contributions was abolished starting from 2016, but the issues of the of the development of contribution-based pension, and this also is a prerequisite for the development of unfunded or pay-as-you-go component of the pension system. But so we need to do a lot to build a modern pension system, and we will also discuss other issues that are interrelated with the above. If we take a look at the relevant agenda that currently exists in the government and the society at large, we will see that people constantly talk about the same issue. On the one hand, that the pension system of Russia, which has formed, and this is an insurance or system which includes some part of the funded or contribution-based system, but it is just something that is embedded in the system which is largely unfunded. So our financial and economic specialists say that this system is very expensive. It has a deficit. There are no funds to cover the obligations that have been publicly accepted, and the budgetary transfers that have to be done by the government through the federal budget is growing from year to year, and the forecasts are not very favorable. The transfers are going to grow as the population becomes older, and the demographic load will be higher because the number of pensioners will be growing, the number of working population will be going down. So this is the issue that is currently discussed all the time. But people again say that the pension system, even in the shape that it exists, is not effective. We have a low compensation ratio. We are below 40%, although there is no overall or universally accepted compensation coefficient or factor calculation. What that means, the proportion of the pension in the average salary. So probably this calculation method will be developed as part of the ratification of Convention 102. But if we use traditional ways of assessment, we are not in line with the 40% compensation factor. That is the minimum rate that is envisioned by Convention 102 of the ILO. Alexander has his own ideas. He will share it with us, I hope, later today. So this is the overall situation that creates an impression of a vicious circle, or a loop, closed loop. If the pensions are low, the system doesn't have appropriate sources of funding. The businesses are saying all the time that the tax burden is too high, and pension contributions are also included into, and that this overall burden should be decreased rather than increased. So there is no room for maneuver in terms of using various sources of funds in order to increase the level of payments, pension payments. But the system also runs with a deficit, and the sources of funds that exists are not enough to cover the expenses of the system. Okay, so this discussion related to the level of compensation, the role of the pension system. Is it a burden on the economy, or is it a system to provide some livelihood for people, which is not sufficient? So the financial and economic ministries and the social ministries, they are not very happy with what we currently have as a pension system. because the expenses are very high and the payments are low. So there is a controversy that we are discussing all the time. The contribution-based component, when it came into being, and the World Bank came up with the entire concept about the crisis of aging and how it can be avoided, or rather not avoided but overcome. Well, everybody is going to find themselves in a situation where they won't have money to pay, because the aging of population is a universal phenomenon. This was first raised in the late 1980s when they introduced this contribution-based model and started to introduce it firstly in Latin America, and it was a purely funded or contribution-based system without any unfunded. And this paradigm was thought to be a panacea that would help to overcome those problems that exist in the unfunded pension system. So we started to discuss these issues with the participation of the World Bank, the IMF, the ILO, the Social Protection, International Organization of Social Protection. We came to the conclusion that purely funded or contribution-based system deepens poverty. There was a very good analysis by ILO of the Chilean experience, and the multi-tier model was considered to be preferable. So in 2002, when we carried out our fundamental pension system reform, we accepted this multi-level or multi-tier model. How organic, how effective the contribution-based component was a very controversial matter. People argued whether it is acceptable from the point of view of constitution or legal system to force people to create their own pension savings. And now when we have taken the decision to do away with the memorandum on the freezing of the system, and the main thesis why the system should be compulsory, because the savings culture is very low, people don't think about the future, they don't have skills of working in the marketplace, therefore they are not prepared to do this on a voluntary basis, which is quite reasonable. And the entire concept was formed. My friend, Mr. Kowalewski, is not here today. He is ill, but we discussed that at length with him, that even in the United States, the concept of liberal paternalism is very widespread, and the core pillar of it is the idea of an impetus. People have to be somehow pushed in the right direction, because they don't always can see what is best for them, and then the default option arrives. So the government creates something, and people may change the option, but because they are lazy, they will just follow the path showed by the government. So we didn't have an option to get away from the funded or contribution-based component in the pensions, and all of this led to the 2014. So, and the default option was not to include all of the people into the contribution-based component, and not in the unfunded option. And those who chose to have a contribution-based component during the 2 years, 2014 and 15, could not just could not carry out these savings component, and the savings component has become a voluntary thing, in essence, because by default, people are in the unfunded system. And if only if the right application, they have a contribution-based component in their pension. So these profound change of 2014, when people are by default sent to the unfunded pension, but it is still a compulsory part of the pension insurance schemes. I'm not going to argue with those decisions that were taken. Like the Prime Minister said, it is useless to discuss those decisions that have been taken, and we are not going to force the bureaucrats to do it because it doesn't pay. So in the context of the development of our pension system, there is a question that I would like to start discussing with my colleagues. To what extent are you happy with the contribution-based component? Do you think that it is optimal, that it is correct? Because is it correct that it is, why it is voluntary today, it is still part of the compulsory pension scheme? The drawbacks for non-governmental, non-state pension funds, we have seen them all. Because the funds of compulsory pension schemes come from federal property. The government deduct something as a benefit, and in certain financial conditions, when they're harsh, this discount may be taken away, and then it may be reintroduced, and it was done for 2 years. It's okay. It is in agreement with the position of the Constitutional Court for the case of Katanyan, Rivenka, and Kataniuk. Is it appropriate? Does it allow us to develop the pension system or the contribution-based component of the pension system? I always thought that it is absolutely necessary as an alternative method of funding the payments, and or these realities that have taken place force us to find a more appropriate contribution-based system. So we are, well, I'm sorry for speaking a lot in the beginning. I just wanted to highlight the events and the dynamics. I'd like to give the floor to Nikolai Kozlov first, so that he shares his views, then Vladimir and Konstantin, and then our international colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuriy. I think that the subject matter of whether we have a match between the format and the contents of this funded element of the pension system is very pertinent today, because the subject, the discussion is now not about having it, but about how to organize it in the right way. In terms of the acts, in the end of 2012, a governmental resolution adopted the strategy for the development of the pension system, which clearly identified that the contribution part of the pension system should be progressing, but should also be somehow improved. So there's no discussion about having or not having this funded part of the pension system. The discussion is about how to bring this funded part of the pension system to today's realities, and how it would match the needs of the government and of the public. I saw a report from an authoritative international institution which clearly says that the funded part of the pension system is needed because of the so-called demographic growth, and because we need investment resources, and we also need this component because we also need to train our population, our households, to think about how they are going to live after they reach the pension age. And that report also said that there is still one outstanding issue, which is about the low efficiency of the funded components of the pension system. There is already a consensus in place that this inefficiency of the funded component of this contribution-based component of the pension system shows that in real terms the funded part would not really provide for the security of the funds accumulated in that part. So in real terms, people were losing on their savings in the funded part of the pension system. So that funded part is lagging behind inflation maybe by 1.5 times and or maybe even more. And we think that this is a key issue and a key challenge that which leads us to this discussion, since we understand that this funded part is not efficient. It means that we need to go back to the root causes and just think whether this component is organized in the right way. And unfortunately, today, the legal format of this funded component within the framework of the public law means that this funded component is not in this legal field per se, and the regulation that we have, it is not really a civil law-based format, but rather we are talking about a compromise. A compromise which would usually cause some problems. In the Federal Law 165 about the pension insurance clearly says that there should not be any mediation and any go-betweens in such pension systems. But the practice actually is that we do have the so-called pension agents, and only through such changes this private pension funds can develop. And as an economist, I can tell you that if we deprive the private pension funds from acting as mediators, would probably kill this funded part of the pension system, which means that we basically need to think how we can organize this better within the format of the civil law. The needs of this pension system cannot be clearly identified under the public law. And in public law, in law in general, it would be difficult to describe the needs and requirements of such system. Of course, there's a new norm to be introduced into the law that basically we're talking about a 5-year period where we can have the pensions to be transferred from one pension fund to another pension fund. It's basically a slip rule, but as a result, what we can see would be a multitude of options for the people to choose from. But we need to somehow reflect such rules and norms in the law, not in an agreement between the pensioners, between the insured and the insurer. Life is quite dynamic, and it means that we also need to change our laws in a dynamic way, and basically we're talking about an ongoing changes to the pension systems. But how to do that? Probably we need to think about how to put these relations into the domain of the civil procedures, civil legal procedures. There's another point which has been actively discussed, but this is not really only a black and white picture. We need to find some practical solutions that would, on the one hand, would stimulate people to form the funded components, but on the other hand, would not be a barrier to the operations of the insurer. The best practices show that the systems which are more voluntary based turn out to be more efficient. Yuriy also mentioned that we analyzed the experience of Latin American countries. There's one country which never used the funded mandatory component of the pension system. This is Brazil, and the efficiency of the voluntary funds, pension funds, were maybe by 50% more efficient than in the other mandatory funded regime countries. So we need really to have some competition. We need to have some control on the parts of the insured as to how the funds from the non-public pension funds are being spent. Day before yesterday, the press reported that the central bank really came up with the initiative to try to compare the efficiency of investment into bonds, into deposits, and other sources and other instruments. Of course, this is something that we all appreciate, that there is a need to have such a comparison, but we're talking more about some administrative approaches, and I don't think we can find a radical solution to the issue of efficiency of the funded component of the pension system. For that, we need to change the mechanism, and we need to really use the civil law procedures for that, and we need to make sure that this funded component would have some influence from the market, would have some impact from the market to improve the efficiency. So I think that although we do have some principled decisions made, the challenge is still with us, and sooner or later we'd have to tackle this issue. Well, it is quite difficult for me to try to be louder than the other speakers in the other room. But anyways, what I wanted to compliment is that I always tried to avoid this subject of what is more efficient, investment or indexation. It is more of an economic issue, but this issue of the funded component and the very construct of the pension system and any legal collisions that we have there in that model are by themselves quite complex. Well, we could have had probably the most efficient funded component, but still we would have some other challenges remaining. Let me just briefly provide you with two provocative small points. We all know that in the pension fund there is some steady and sustained deficit. There is, of course, some subsidiary responsibility of the government to complement this deficit, but there is a deficit of the pension fund to meet its commitments and the various functions that the pension fund is having. Now, of course, it has a multitude of functions, but there's some shortfall of income from various tariffs and social benefits to the various categories of payers. There's a shortfall of fund for the early retirement schemes. There's this high 6% charge to complement the pension schemes, etc. Sometimes we're talking about some man-made or artificial challenge for the pension fund. But generally speaking, there is a shortage of money in the pension fund, and this is covered by the budgetary transfers, something which is of concern to our Ministry of Finance. Now, with the well, of course, we need to have such long money, this funded component of the pension system, which is favorable and beneficial for the economy in general. Of course, if there is a funded component, then it probably would increase the budget transfers. And I would say that the budget money are being used to somehow complement the funded component. But maybe it would be easier and more feasible to follow the example of Norway, basically a future generations fund. It would be easier to manage, it would be cheaper. So can we substitute the funded component of the pension system with such a future generations fund, plus guarantees like the deposit insurance agency? It's like the story from the Three Musketeers, that it could be too small for a duke, but too much for a simple citizen. Sometimes these guarantees are too small, and if the public makes people to form such pension funds and contributions, then the government should also take on the responsibility to guarantee such accumulated savings. But we're talking about some indexation, say, at the inflation rate or at the growth rate of the pension fund. People actually were entitled to ask a question, since the government made me to form this funded component of the pension system, and my investments were not really very good, so please compensate me for any lost opportunity or for any lost money. The situation has changed. The option by default today is to put all the pension contributions into the unfunded component of the pension system, into the pay-as-you-go part. So why at all would we need this funded component of the pension system? It is a costly thing. People Well, of course, we're talking about some contributions. These are not right. Contributions are indexed at a certain rate, at a certain percentage of the payroll of the pay. It can become indexed at the growth of income in the market. And the question is, in this voluntary-based system, do we at all need such a funded component of the pension system? So I would appreciate your opinion whether we would really need that. Good morning, dear colleagues. Indeed, before I can come up with some substantive thoughts, I need to make two comments. I don't think we would be able to fit into our time limit until noon today. It seems that we can really discuss it at length for much longer. And also, from that same novel that you remembered from Alexander Dumas about the Three Musketeers, I like another character who said that I'm fighting because I'm fighting. So we will be fighting, but let me come to answer your question. So there's tactics and there is strategy. From the point of view of strategy, we are very much satisfied by the decision of the government to keep and preserve the funded component. We have a combined, a hybrid system. We have a pay-as-you-go system. We have a voluntary-based and a mandatory-based funded components. We think that this is the best configuration for today, but from the point of view of tactics, we still need to fine-tune a number of aspects there. And let me discuss 2 points. If we remember the critics who criticized the funded component of the pension system, in principle, they were talking about 2 things. First, low reliability and for the insured. I mean, there is no guarantee that the pension fund would go bankrupt tomorrow and money could be lost. And the second criticism was about income, that there is too much return on investment. But I would say that this is a paradox of sorts, because risks and return would be 2 sides. And of course, if you have a higher return on investment, your risks could also be higher. But this is a trap which we were led into. And of course, if you're talking about return on your investment in the previous years, anything that was done by the government in terms of regulation was to somehow maintain some minimum annual income and return. The whole system was focused on the idea of having at least some minimal income, maybe a cent or $1, but still some positive return. And all the funds were tolerant in terms of having at least 0 plus 1 unit, but not 0 minus 1 unit. This means that even after some changes in legislation were made, we still believe that we need to take some more steps to fine-tune this return on investment of the pension funds. We need to have some legislative changes that would make it possible for us to understand whether we need to invest into equity, into shares. At least we can ask ourselves whether we can really invest into financial intermediaries. We don't know whether they are going to finance the real sector, whether they are going to have long-term financial investments or not. So in terms of fine-tuning the income of the pension funds, we do understand and appreciate that we need to have some changes in legislation. To us, I think an optimal model for the longer term would be that when non-public, non-governmental pension funds and the appropriate management companies would not be very much restricted formally. They would have their internal audits and risk management systems that would really identify their risk appetite. But there would not be any restrictions on whether you need to invest into, say, BB plus rating stock, or invest only into OECD countries, etc. It would be an internal decision for the pension fund, for the private pension fund. And here we come to the point of sustainability. The pension funds need to provide for sustainable investment. The pension fund can lose money, but if money is lost, the pension fund should be able to compensate for that. Not maybe from future profits, but maybe using some other provisions, reserves, and shareholders' money, etc. In my view, the guarantee system would be an element to support such a non-governmental pension funds. And I think we can come back to this discussion in the future, and we will be talking about a guarantee mechanism for the voluntary contributions. But this is a question for future. First, we need to understand how the current system is going to move on. It has just...
If we take the legal aspect of it, the matter of principle is that we move funds from non-commercial to commercial organizations and forms, and we say that these should be either public or closed stock limited liability companies. But for whom how shall they get profit for stakeholders, for shareholders? That's the classical. I would like to say that any shareholder has two strategies to grow the value of the share and increase the capitalization of the company, or pay out dividends. So this is the practical manifestation of this contradiction. We have been saying that we are now transferring to a 5-year sliding scale, so that means that we assume that we will be sustaining losses for a certain period of time. There cannot be dividends in this period. I said about my preference in this matter already. Another thing is that in principle, and this topic was discussed already, we need to discuss the issue of the fund's responsibility for substandard investments. When we included non-governmental pension funds to the guarantee systems, we were very critical about the quality of assets. And if we saw that when the asset was bought, its rate of return was lower than the average, we made those funds to supply the difference. This is not an elegant managerial decision. Well, I don't know, maybe it was related to whatever. We just wanted to protect the rights of pensioners. All this was done as part of the supervisory activities and the part of the central bank. This measure should be enshrined in legislation. Well, I can continue for a long time. How about the responsibility of the management or trust companies? Yes, they should be held responsible. They should bear subsidiary responsibility or liability. We, the society at large, can address our claims to the non-governmental pension fund, because the trust company is just an instrument of it, of this fund. But the fund can reach the management of trust company. This is related to fiduciary responsibility or liability, but for this we need to change legislation. Today is just hot air, which hasn't been reflected in any legislation or bylaws, and this means a lot of work. And when we raise the issue, who shall earn the money, the investor or the pensioner, it will be a huge public debate. There is an illusion that if we straighten the system so that the budget accumulates resources directly and then distributes them amongst the pensioners, there is an illusion that it will easily achievable. It is easily achievable, but the state budget, we can talk about the federal budget and the state budget, whatever, they have to deal with a lot of tasks, and not all of them are related with long-term investment to make sure that the pensioners increase their pension payments. So today we have huge burdens on the budget, and those funds that are not going to get to non-governmental pension funds, they will be used to resolve other problems, and they won't be creating any value added for pensioners, and this is the biggest risk. And there is a contradiction between shareholders and insured persons, and here the legislation clearly speaks, tells us what you can take yourself and what you should give to the pensioner. So you have expressed your position. Do you think that the decision that has been taken by the government is optimal? Well, for a civil servant, it is probably the only possible approach. Well, you are in between, a quasi-civil service within the central bank. So Alexander Borisovich said that we should not keep the contribution-based component within the compulsory pension system. You are saying that this should not be done, but why? Why the contribution-based part of the pension should be within this compulsory? Because there may be another crisis, another decision on freezing these assets can be taken. I will start from the beginning. I think that from the legal standpoint, even this discussion is not productive. So there is an idea, in order to ensure the rights of those who are insured, we need to clearly state in the law. Even OECD gives such a recommendation. I think that this discussion is not productive in any way. From the legal standpoint, from the point of view of law, for me it is quite clear where the public part ends and where the civil law begins. Who has requirements, who bears which responsibility, and I think we can talk only about the assets of the pension funds if we consider money to be assets. Well, we're talking about additional guarantees. We want to enshrine them at the level of law. But when there will be a need, at time of crisis, the law may be changed. This is not a panacea. I'm quite pragmatic about that. I think that guarantees mean that we only state in the law that something belongs to somebody. This is a system of additional instruments, mechanisms, and infrastructure that helps the system to sustain itself. So there are 30 million people now in the contribution-based system, pension system. It's a very important factor. It means that you cannot dismantle this system easily. If we create a guaranteed system of pension, and certain funds will be accumulated, not tomorrow we're not going to face any bankruptcy because, well, we are selecting funds very strictly. We screen them. Well, in order not to speak too long, I think that the non-compulsory component of the pension will be competing with the unfunded element, and it will allow the government to reduce their costs involved in paying out payments or indexing those pensions. But today we know that in order to develop the voluntary component, you need two factors. Number one, you need to have some free funds, both the funds of the employer and the insured person who wants to get certain pension. This factor is not in place today, I'm afraid. And another factor is we should develop a habit of making such savings for the rainy day. So this experience has been worsened by our historic or long-term lack of confidence to the government, so we will need a few more decades to pass. So this is my position. Well, I understand your position. I'm a stubborn person. I don't quite understand what it gives us today if we keep the contribution-based component from the point of view of those goals that you have proclaimed. The voluntary contribution-based component is subject to benefits because it is deducted from compulsory contributions. Well, we can discuss this issue for hours at length. For employer, it makes sense if they have additional resources. For the worker, no. Your arguments don't work. And there are no contributions for workers. For employees, if a person wants to go to a non-governmental state pension fund and says, I want to, but there are no obstacles, but there are no resources there. And this resource is not going to be created either way. I think we're losing time here. So another comment from me. If wanted the employee to pay, the government could reduce the tax base. Well, there are 13%. There is a 13% rate. And 22% are not also. Today, a person within the limit of 120,000 rubles, he gets benefits even from the 13% rate because he doesn't have any money. Well, this was raised by the Ministry of Labor. We can touch upon this topic briefly, but if there is no such contribution, where will it come from? If 6% was taken from the employer for the contribution part of the pension, this is not a contribution part of the 6%. And when the employer doesn't pay any contribution, well, we will introduce a contribution for pension. Where will we deduct it from? Why is it only for pensions rather than the social security system at large? I'll give you the floor now. Thank you very much for inviting me to this wonderful forum. I will act as a character from The Dog's Heart by Bulgakov. I will say I don't agree. Well, I do agree, in fact, with many ideas of esteemed colleagues who spoke before me. I will try not to repeat them. Yuriy, today we have a benefit. Let's talk about personal contribution. There is a benefit on even if you have 120,000 and use the 13% rate. There are benefits for employers if they create corporate pension schemes. Why the number of insured persons in the corporate system hasn't changed for 10 years now? This is a question. I will answer this one because one thing is but when you have to pay something, you will have to pay your income tax without any, well, you won't know it because the employer will pay. But if you can take part of this tax and not give it to the state, but send it to the non-state government pension fund, but those benefits are not very interesting. I've never been president. I've not always been president. I used to talk to various heads of corporations, not in the oil and gas sector, but I was talking to heads of SMEs with $1 billion of turnover, with a high number of staff, and I told them, do you have everything? You have tax benefits. You can bring it to the fund. And he tells me, dear friend, where shall I take this money? This is my turnover capital. I have a minimum of it. You're forgetting that our economy is hardly alive. This is my turnover capital, current assets. I have to take a loan from the bank and then give part of it on a social program with a wonderful tax benefit. What are you talking about? When I have a different financial position, that will then start a corporate scheme. What is the average salary in the country? 32,000 rubles per month. Who would be prepared to pay out of this money if he has a family to pay in order to form long-term pension assets? 2 million people who, together with the employer, form these assets in corporate pension schemes. 2 million. This is according to our calculations. We have 7 million participants. Out of them, 2 million pay money themselves to voluntary pension schemes, and 7 million pay together with their employers, and that's it. And all those stories about tax benefits, it's not more than a myth. I would like to go back to certain legal aspects. You know that I have an impression that we are kind of using inappropriate concepts. When we are saying that we're going to transfer it to the civil law zone, we're talking about a different thing. We're talking about the sources of funding. Either they're financed by a contribution, or they are transferred to the field of the civil, to the realm of civil law. Then the contributions will be removed. Then, if we don't have a compulsory contribution, we just take 6% and transfer to the bank. The pension fund relaxes, and the worker can do whatever he pleases. So, let us be frank. We are not saying that we transfer it to the domain of civil law. We are talking about replacing one system with another. And everything becomes voluntary or non-mandatory. Whether it is good or bad, the government tells us it is bad. I'm not arguing with that, because we understand that in today's conditions, including external economic relations, the pension funds are the only source of funding of the economy in the long term. Another thing is how we, together with the government, are going to make use of this source of funding. And here the main dilemma and the main challenge for the system of non-governmental pension funds for the nearest term is how well they will be able to prove their loyalty to the motherland and invest the money in the real sectors of the economy, directly or via financial intermediaries such as banks. But still, we are investing into our economy. We invest in the development of our enterprises and companies. Now about the effectiveness.
No, it's a long issue to discuss, but I don't think that this is feasible to discuss the investment of the pension funds and the efficiency of those in the last 12 years. And I think you appreciate this very well, because most of the money, at least 5 years ago, most of the funds were in a government-run company which only invested into government debt papers, and only in the last 4 years those pension funds were invested elsewhere, and we are being blamed for the fact that we have some shady agents going around, but it's been for 3 years now that we have been in close dialogue about the infringement of rights and probably some decent actions by the intermediaries, but I can tell you that there are only 1,400 such agents who provide services to 16 million people, and so it is not about agents or go-betweens, but we need to appreciate the fact that the government makes an effort to redirect parts of the burden into redirect the pension funds into investment, and non-governmental pension funds and management companies should serve as the go-betweens in this process. If you don't like that, then please come up with a public equivalent. So we again, here I would probably disagree with Nikolai. So we are talking about the fact that who would be interested in the maximum result of such, maximum return of such investment, and what are the conditions that the government provided in terms of restrictions and rules of the game as to how to increase the efficiency of such investment. I don't really want to discuss how many has been invested in the last 5 years. It just indeed we were forced to have at least some marginal profit on that. The question as to whether we have this challenge of the funded component of the mandatory pension system. I think we do have such a challenge, but I think we're missing one point here. Nikolai, whom I respect very much, did not discuss that. I'd say that this attack on the funded component of the pension system is mostly related to the complexity of managing this component, and I do understand the administrative burden on the pension fund of Russia as to how to manage this funded component. Can we really directly manage those funded components by the non-government and non-public pension funds? I think this can be done, but at least there should be some administrator or manager for such contributions. Can say there be some transfers between the various funds? Perhaps we need to pay something to the pension fund for the opportunity to manage those contributions by non-public entities. I don't know. But there is another legal point. The changes in legislation in the recent years really put this whole machinery of the pension fund of Russia basically into a state of agitation, and of course we feel sorry about the pension fund. It is not our initiative, but we are ready to help to resolve the issue. And legally speaking, in terms of legal definitions, there's probably a catch-22 situation. I think that also in the public law domain, we can this way or another way to somehow build relationships between the various players. And the question is whether the government and the state, by redirecting parts of this administrative burden into the private area, whether they really can support this. I think that in terms of the investment returns, almost 1 trillion rubles was taken out of the VEB, and probably could have been spent in a better way, but this money was spent to help the pension system. And I think that indeed government needs to retain some mechanisms of influence in case of some eventualities, and help to manage such investment. 3 points, that whether there would be contributions, only voluntary-based contributions. I don't think we need to cloud this in civil law definitions. We're talking about finance and economics here. So, voluntary contributions, management, administration of those contributions, and third point, whether we need to invest this money or spend this right away. So, I'd say the 3 destinations where we can discuss and what would define the fate of the funded components of the pension system. Well, I'd probably defend Nikolai, and I would tell to Mr. Grymov that indeed I see some organic in the combination of the mandatory and voluntary parts. Now, if this funded component would be totally voluntary and put into the non-governmental institutions, then probably the government can provide a deduction, a tax deduction for those payers. This deduction would be still managed by the pension fund, and if the pension fund sees that the employee did not pay anything into this pension fund, then this administration can turn to having it done in a mandatory way. So I don't think that there is a challenge here. I don't think that there is a contradiction here as well. It's been over an hour. It is an hour and 12 minutes for our deliberations already. We probably came to a very important point, which way to choose, the private way or the public way. And let me switch from right to left and to give the floor to Alexander, whom we somehow associate with ILO. And he is responsible for the implementation of various social security conventions and regulations. But I'll start with the criticism. Vladimir was referring to a positive example that we somehow tried to incorporate pension funds, and these are commercially oriented institutions. But the question is that using our system, which is still there, the pension funds are insurers for the mandatory pension insurance, so they are in charge of social security. But as far as I understand, ILO has always been of the opinion that a commercially oriented institution, a profit-making institution, cannot really be providing such social security functions and services. What we did is that we just removed this provision from the social security laws, and this idea of profit-making organization or institution to be acting as such. So there was a caveat saying that basically such profit-making or for-profit institutions, they would be working and operating with the pension fund on a non-for-profit basis. But indeed, the pension convention of ILO, the most recent is from 1967, and I think that this point about the involvement of various commercial institutions is there, and I think that we have had quite a few changes since 1967, including those various formats of the pension insurance, and in our today's world we simply cannot really rely on ILO because there's no any recent convention on that score. Thank you, Yuriy, and indeed thank you for the invitation to ILO to take part in the discussion of, I would say, a very intimate issue as to which of the pension regimes Russia needs. I'd say that we take an outside look. We're not trying to go deep into those discussions and debates that are being held in Russia on legal and commercial and economic issues about the design of the pension system. An international institution would take an outsider's look view of what is going on in Russia, probably from the shores of the Lake of Geneva, of course, where ILO is based, and basically trying to when I was preparing for this discussion, I asked my staff to come up with a table, with a template, comparing the social view and the economic view on the debate. So just trying to understand why this debate is so intensive. So when you take a look at this table, it is clear then that well, there are the economists are basically take a fresh look at the old things, and those who are in favor of the social security are probably referring to the old songs as well, but singing them in the old way. Now, we do understand that Russia needs to be reminded what is most important, and I think that Russia's experience is very important for the world, because Russia is the only country which was trying to build a developed socialism, but now is trying to build some capitalism. I don't think you'd find such a good source for experience, for lessons learned elsewhere. So we really need to remind ourselves about the main things. And humanity decided that indeed we need to have to come up with some international institution about social justice and equality, and that is why back in 1919 the ILO was established, and this most important element of this equality is reflected in the conventions. I don't think that you need to be looking for many technical details. You need to be looking for the main principles, the reminder that what is important. The ILO conventions were in place back in time when there was no developed socialism in place, and those conventions were written by capitalist countries, I'd say. So let me just recall here what economists like most: investment, economic growth, long money. That's the most important element. The social bloc really cares about social equality and justice and combating poverty. The old values, I'd say. But is there any common value between them? Just recently, I actually have adhered the UN Committee on Economic, Cultural and Social Rights on March 6th of this year resolved on the main guarantees and social safety measures, and there it says that there are main components for social security. Actually, there are three such main elements. This concept of social security is a human right, and it is also an economic and social necessity for progress. Second, we need also to confirm and support the unfunded part of the social security, and also of paramount importance would be to have this primary and priority responsibility of the state to provide social support and security. These are some of the ideas that have been reflected both in ILO and UN conventions, for example, in this Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Pact. Now, using these main elements, the question is whether we can find some common ground that can be used by both those who belong to the social camp, social security camp, and to the economic camp. And I think that all countries really would like to have such an ensemble to perform together. And if you invest in long money into investment, but if there is no basically feedback from the households, if people don't have money to consume, if there is no aggregate demand, then why would you at all need such investment? Investment and demand would go hand in hand, and ILO says and shows what links money and consumer demand, and the link is this employment policy, jobs, decent work, etc. So if investment goes into creating new productive jobs, and by the way, the president had this idea of creating 20 million jobs, so where they are, that's the question. And the engine of the economy is in this employment, so indeed we need to have a link established between the labor market and the pension system, and for that we have ILO, we have the conventions. And actually the idea is about this link, and this is where we see this link in Geneva, but not in this debate in Russia. By the way, this funded component of the pension fund, I mean, why would you keep this money in banks or invest it into public bonds? So I don't think we are talking here about some market mechanisms for investment, because the market is so much regulated by the state that you cannot really hope for any growth in such element. So if you're talking about some market approaches, you need to really use to the maximum the potential and capacity of market mechanisms to stimulate the growth and development of this sector. I mean, what would be a problem with, say, selling, say, so-called pension schools, or say you can also be selling pension bonds that the pension fund could have been offering for, say, with a maturity until 2030. So you're talking about some pension points. You have some, you're accumulating some points. You have some cash payments. So why not go out and buy some pension points that would be valid after 2030? Basically, a bond with a maturity in 2030. This bond would be redeemed not at once, but basically during all your life and in installments.
these monies should be invested in projects that create jobs and allow us to increase the productivity of labor and the level of consumption by population. This is the approach of ILO. And if the investments are channeled into shares or some other instruments, and if we look for a big return on investment, the trend will be towards speculative transactions and investments in the market, because the return on investment is the biggest there. Then you should create a new element, pension futures. You should take a look at this approach as well. If you are moving somewhere, you should do this full speed ahead. But from the point of view of conventions, well, before the Second World War, the conventions said that commercial organizations should not be involved in social security. A commercial organization and social goals are not compatible. Until now, in Russia, when we say about insurance, we forget that. It should be a social and system, and they're trying to introduce purely commercial principles into such systems. But after the Second World War, in 1952, when the Convention 102 was adopted on minimal standards, there were facts. In the United States, for example, had private pension funds. This movement started in this direction, and this provision was removed directly. But it was removed from only those provisions that regulate compulsory pensions. But where you have voluntary pension schemes, there may be commercial organizations, but not necessarily. But Russia is trying to combine mandatory nature of pension schemes and commercial. Well, we are not against looking at the results, whatever comes out of it. But stability for pension systems is considered by us as the main asset. And the pension system must at least have one element that works well. And in Russia, there is already the unfunded part of the, which doesn't work very well, and the contribution-based part, which doesn't work very well without appropriate income. And you want to combine these two. What will come out of it? It will result in something good. One thing should work at least well. Europe has made their choice. I'm going to go to Brussels soon, and we will be preparing the final conclusions or findings of the new report on the adequacy of pensions. And the main conclusion there is that the crisis has improved thinking in many countries, and people are again saying that the unfunded system should work well and should provide the 40% of compensation. And there's countries where they have developed corporate systems. Those countries may use these schemes in order to supplement the unfunded payment. And there are only 4 countries in Europe in which the contribution-based system is corporate, and it creates a significant, it plays a significant role. Accounts for about 20% of compensation rate, and all other countries are working towards strengthening their unfunded systems. Maybe this new conclusion of the report will give an opportunity to Russia to think again very seriously how to create a general system combining both elements together. Thank you very much. I do like the Geneva Lake, and I like ILO. I like to go to Geneva. I understand that this is a unique organization that has a UN mandate to create conventions in the social field. There are trilateral approach when decisions are based on the consensus by employers, trade unions, and organizations. But I think that OECD is more active in creating new approaches to the funded or contribution-based pensions. But a convention would be a good idea. So we are going further into Geneva, and I would like to give the floor to the General Secretary of Social Security, which is a daughter organization of the ILO. They put together best international practices. Mr. Cancellation, the laureate of Femida Prize, he's a reformist by nature. When he became General Secretary, he put forward a very interesting initiative, and under his auspices, certain manuals were developed on separate sections of Social Security. Such manuals were created on the investment related to pensions and regulating the relations in this field, which is very important. From the point of view of those changes that come about, we want to translate all those manuals into Russian and publish it here so that both government and non-government players could use it. I would like to use Hans-Horst, my good friend, to make a contribution and comment on the discussion that we have witnessed here.
It's a great honor, pleasure to be here with you.
Звука нет, что со звуком?
It's a great honor, pleasure to be here with you.
Для меня большая честь быть здесь сегодня с вами.
And I would like to contribute to the discussion by taking an international view on the topic. Because I must say, when I listen to the discussions here and when I think about the knowledge that I've achieved over the years of the very vivid reform initiatives in the Russian Federation, I can say that basically the challenge that you are facing is something that is very common. It's not just a Russian discussion, even though you have a special heritage and there are special kind of discussions and cultural issues, historic issues, because basically it's a question about how to balance the adequacy of the pension system with the sustainability of the pension system. And there are three ways to address it if you look at international experiences, which the ESA is trying to gather. One is to look at the very system design and look at the pillar structure in a country. So what's the role of the state? What's the role of the employer and employee? And what's the role of the individual? These are three actors whose role has to be redefined in order to establish a solid basis in terms of generating the necessary financial resources to secure the future of the pension system. And what we can see is that in systems that were more barrage-based, where it was more a text-based and text-financed approach, that we can see this has certain limitations, especially for those where it's contribution-based on employment. Because what to do with those that do not have long employment periods and so on and so forth in a changing society where the traditional support mechanism via the family, the breadwinner, does not exist anymore. So here we see that there are public pension pillars added to that, a kind of basic pension pillar provided through tax income. And then you have the contributory system on top of that. If you have a system where which is tax-based, you have to add the contributory pillar because there is a limitation for how high taxes can be. And also, of course, that you have the employment, they have the employment relation to contribute also to the sustainability of the system. So, and the individual pillar, where you talk about funded, private, additional, I fully agree with my colleague from the ILO that we have to see this as an additional opportunity for individuals to secure a decent pension income that kind of lives up to their expectations. And here we have to take the strengths and weaknesses of a particular private administration into consideration. And this has been discussed, and I will not add to that. I would rather add to two elements that I think have not been touched at all, and which I'm surprised about, because I think there's a very important discussion on pension age. Because when we talk about how to secure the sustainability of the system, I think this funded, if you look at the size of the funded element, to me is not really the critical one. The critical one is how to ensure that the pension age reflects developments in life expectancy, which fortunately after the crisis in the 90s now is also increasing. So people live longer, which we should celebrate, but how to have a decent pension under these conditions if the income in the system has been reduced. So therefore I think that in all OECD countries over the past years there has been reforms introducing mechanisms to adjust pension age. In the Russian Federation, you have still the same pension age since 1928. Talking about reforms, I think this is one that should be discussed at least. And then there's another element to it, which is in certain countries, there's an equality issue as well, because you have different pension ages for women and men. On what basis? So there are some discussions that I think are really needed, and there are international experiences on how this discussion can be organized, and in particular, then how the reforms can be introduced. And where no doubt our recommendation is to do it in a long-term step, so take it over 10, 20, 30 years, and not as a shock, and in particular not affect those that are just, let's say, awaiting their pension in the next years. The last issue I would like to mention, which has not been addressed either, is, and what we have seen internationally, is what has happened over the past years, and particularly with the economic crisis, is that early retirement schemes have been abolished. And I understand that 1/3 of the pensioners in Russia have an early retirement access, due to, no doubt, historic reasons. But now in modern Russia, and given that you are part of a global economy where competition acts for all and nobody is excluded, I think there's good time to also look into your early retirement approach. Because in my view, there is a mix-up between what should be an occupational insurance, a work injury or burden, occupational disease, occupational accident insurance, where people, let's say, because of their work, have medical conditions which do not allow them to continue working. These people should, of course, be protected. This is foreseen also in ILO conventions. But that you have a general approach towards offering early retirement to people just because they work in an enterprise that has a classification that entitles them to do that. I think this is an approach that needs revision. And by approaching these two elements that I've mentioned, retirement age, and you approach the issue of early retirement, you can ensure that the funds necessary to offer decent pensions, adequate pensions, because this is, in my view, the main challenge in the Russian pension system today, that people that even are receiving pensions have to continue working, which again is a contradiction because the pension income is too low. So it's really about ensuring reasonable, decent pension income for people that qualify because of old age. So the reason that was established many years ago when the first old age pensions were established, they were there for people who could no longer provide for themselves, that there was an income side to it. So one can say at the same time the Russian system today is too generous and insufficient. So this is, I think, a dilemma that has to be addressed, and the ISA is very happy to continue working and exchanging with the Russian counterparts. I know all these discussions are currently also being taken and underway, and as Yuriy said, the ISA has developed guidelines for our members, the Social Security administrations, in particular also for pension funds, that can assist them in reviewing their systems, reviewing their administration, including if they are administrating funds, investing funds. We have developed investment guidelines that can be, as was mentioned, also of use if you're looking for how to manage this funded pillar in a better way, because it has to be managed. Otherwise, we can see what happened in Latin America and in Eastern Europe, where these funded pillar experiences have been quite negative. So there's a lot of experience, and forum like this, where we have open discussions and exchanges, I think are very, very valuable in order to see which progress every country can make. But what's very clear to me is every country has a unique way and has to find its unique way. As Frank Sinatra is singing, my way. I think every country has to find its way, guided by the ILO guidelines and conventions and recommendations, and guided by the international experience that we from the ESA are happy to share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You have made you turned our discussion from a literary into a literary musical thing. Thank you very much. We are happy to let Mr. Cancellation go because he has to give an interview to Russia Today, and I hope he will share his ideas about the work of the forum. We have still 20 minutes to go, and before I give the floor to Yelena, our last speaker, so that she sums up the outcomes of our discussions from the point of view of the Council of Europe, and Hans-Horst has touched upon a number of rather acute topics. Each of them requires a separate round tables, both the pension age, the early retirement, and the President gave a direct order to the government to organize a discussion in the society, especially the most painful topic of pension age, so that people understand what they need, what do they need it for, if at all, and the decision should be taken in an open, consultative manner. Indexation is also another issue. So all these ideas are worked out together in order to optimize the system, and they come largely not from the Ministry of Labour, but rather from the Ministry of Finance, increasing in the pension age, indexation according to inflation, limited pension payments while you still at work, and certain limitations on early retirement. All of these are the ways to alleviate the financial burden of the pension system. I'm just identifying these issues from an expert point of view. So I'm not concerned very much that while we are seeking to balance our pension system, we are not touching the sources of funds, although it is not a taboo and our tariffs are not the highest in Europe. Here we have a lot of things to work on, like they do in Europe. Certain benefits for different kinds of employees. Those benefits are introduced. Nobody then analyzes how effective they are. I remember that the Ministry of Transport lobbied a benefit for shipping companies. They said that if we reduce the burden of investment, the rate of investment of insurance, they told us that all the ships in the world will fly the Russian flag then. But several years have come, and nothing happened. And as a result, the pension fund has they do not receive appropriate income, and the Ministry of Transport is no longer interested in that. The benefit is introduced, but to what results what kind of results it brings, it's a different story. We should take a look at liabilities. They can be optimized, but you have to understand where the limit of sensitivity is. Where lies the line that you cannot cross in terms of reducing the pension payments to the population? And we are groping in the dark because we don't have social indicators that are recommended by the ILO in order to assess whether the pension payments are adequate. We didn't develop them themselves, and we are not party to Convention 102.
As a result, all the decisions are made in a sporadic way, and in this sense could be fraught with dangers. In terms of the pension age, indeed, the policy, the measure is quite okay and widely used abroad, what Mr. Konkolevsky mentioned. But what do we expect from this policy? I think elsewhere this pension age, if it is objective and if it matches the real situation with the able-bodied populations and life expectancy, then this pension age measure would prevent any unobjective increase of pension payments and disbursements. Now, the way we put it here is that let's use the pension age to cut the expenses of the pension system. But I don't think this is the way this measure is being used elsewhere, because the pension age has some reverse side to it, something which is sometimes omitted. Any higher pension age would mean that you have longer time to basically earn your pension contributions. The longer you work, the more pension liabilities and responsibilities you would be having, and our system is mostly an unfunded system, and this means that there would be more disbursements to those who would be retiring. Nobody is actually doing this analysis and calculation. People are scared with some demographic projections, but this demographic projection says nothing about the pension age. The projection says that we will be having so many able-bodied and so many non-able-bodied populations. But this projection is not really overlaid with the labor productivity dynamics, and we don't know how much people would be producing in terms of goods and services, and we don't know about how many of those who are believed to be employed will be realistically employed, and we have quite a high percentage of the employed pensioners because of the low pensions. I'm saying this because we're talking about very complex calculations and projections, so cannot do that in a linear way. There is a myth that Mr. Hans-Horst actually said. There were different systems, and indeed, sometimes we never had a pension age in the past, and people, to have some retirement, they had to go through some medical commissions, and people were recognized as handicapped because of their old age, and only then would you be having a pension. And actually, though, the members of the collective funds only received their pensions in 1964. And there were some studies about when people would be losing their ability to work because of the old age. Unfortunately, we no longer have such studies around, so you have to make decisions about the pension age blindly, without realizing the realistic pension age. But to avoid any scholastic discussions, we need to base this on some serious academic research. Same is about early retirement. You just cannot remove early retirement schemes just because it's too costly. You have to really see the labor market and see where conditions are improved labor conditions are improved or not. And also paying pensions for the employed. Indeed, we are a part of the insurance model, and when you're talking about the people who can really work after retirement, so they can be entitled to such employment. There are some cases when you can suspend pension payments for the pensioners who continue working. In the West, this is an instrument no longer used because, again, there is a reverse side to it, like with the pension age. But the thing is that the project that unfortunately the proposal that was offered by the Ministry of Labor that people basically can accumulate so much and then any accumulation would be stopped. The thing is that people can have no source of income without any employment while they reach a certain threshold. And about indexation, indeed, if we chose the way of this insurance model, then you have to index pension payments at the rate of growth of salaries and wages, because otherwise we would have a system when people for some unequal work would be getting equal retirement payments. And there would be a gap that you will have to overcome with the various budget schemes and transfers that are costly to society. We have another 7 minutes. So, Yelena, I'm sorry, but you have 7 minutes to comment on what you heard here. Well, thank you. Indeed, I would not probably be bold enough to comment on that, but let me provide you with some of my thoughts. I would probably continue what Mr. Konkalevsky mentioned. If we base, if we rely on the various international regulations, there's one key point there, that we need to provide some decent income to a retiree. But the way it would be achieved, with which methods, it's up to every country to decide. Of course, if you take 3 formats of the pension system, then the unfunded system is most popular. The Convention number 102 is about social insurance, about the 40% distribution principle. That is, a pensioner would be getting a minimum of 40% of his or her pay while employed. But of course, every country would seek to increase this limit, maybe through the funded component or through some pension retirement insurance. But if the pension system cannot provide a solution to that, then the pension system is not efficient, both economically and legally speaking. That is, it is not providing for the fundamental right of a person, which is one of the fundamental rights of a person, that's the right to life, and including pension. And of course, we all know that there was some incorporation of the pension funds. The idea was to increase the equity of the statutory capital of those pension funds to provide better guarantees to future pensioners. But we know in the law on guarantees for the funds, we know that those non-public, non-governmental pension funds would only be covering the nominal value of the contributions. And here I don't really see any incentive for people to take part in such pension funds and make voluntary contributions. We already discussed this important idea that there would be a moratorium on the income and profit for the privatized pension funds, so that such profits, there would be a freeze on that for the first, say, few years, so that such profits would be spent on increasing the funds of the pension funds, but not dividends. And indeed, we are probably resuming this discussion about the trusts and trust property. Now, leading civil law expert Mr. Sukhanov was actually against that. But there's in the Anglo-Saxon system, the assets of the pension funds is a debatable issue, and the assets basically would be the main type and format of such trust property. I think to Russia this is an alien idea, and personally I believe that this is not a good option. If for some reason through an adopted law we would have this debate resumed. But the voluntary character of the contribution system, I think we can only hope for that when wages and salaries would be high, because we have the very low wages, and this is an obstacle to the existence of such a voluntary element in the funded component. But if you take Gazprom or Sberbank or the Russian Rail, then they actually have these voluntary contribution schemes, but this is mandatory. So this is a mixture of the voluntary and mandatory systems. So all employees of those big companies would be paying into voluntary pension systems. Now, about the purely voluntary nature of such components, I think we are basically really talking about a replacement of one system with another system. From the legal point of view, I think those who are already covered by the mandatory contribution component should preserve their rights, like it was done in Hungary. Since 1999, they stopped paying mandatory contributions into the pension system. They are only using voluntary contributions, but those who paid before in a mandatory way into the pension fund actually preserved all their entitlements and rights. But civil law, I think that if we are talking about the development of this pension system in a civil law format, so I think we need to speak about full coverage by civil law. We cannot mix really and combine public and private law here. We need to expand the range of investment tools and also have some responsibility for the loss of funds, like bankruptcy and indexation of accumulations and inheriting the pension funds. I don't think that there should be some inheritance rights to any pension contributions, because we're talking about personal accumulations and savings. So such personal savings can be redistributed between the participants of a pension fund. And indeed, there could be many payers and few recipients but no, I'm talking about the unfunded component of the pension system. So for the funded component, I think the rights of inheritance are quite feasible there. Well, we were on time, so at least we were able to touch upon all those pertinent issues of the pension system life. I think we had a good discussion for professionals, and I think we were in line with the President's instructions to discuss the pension system. Probably we would take the minutes and publish that so that people can learn from that. And we would continue our deliberations in the future. Thank you to all of you. And I also would like to thank our moderator, because I never saw such an actively working moderator often. Thank you.